needs all of this input from so many outside entities? Why can't it just come up with these science-based guidelines on its own?
Well, they do so to ensure that the recommendations are feasible to implement and that they adequately address the safety and well-being of individuals the guidance is aimed to protect. And that type of consultation is pretty standard as a part of their consideration processes.
One other topic.
Sure.
Right now, there is a huge Chinese rocket in outer space that's going to be crashing down to Earth, likely on Saturday, and nobody knows exactly where. It'll likely be in an ocean, but it could, or pieces of it could, come down over a populated area, and this isn't the first time that China has knowingly allowed something like this to happen. So does the White House condemn this kind of repeated reckless behavior from China's space program?
Well, let me first say that U.S. Space Command is aware of and tracking the location of the Chinese Long March 5B in space. And obviously the Space Command would have more specifics on that tracking and additional details. The United States is committed to addressing the risks of growing congestion due to space debris and growing activity in space. And we want to work with the international community to promote leadership in responsible space behaviors. It's in the shared interests of all nations to act responsibly in space to ensure the safety, stability, security, and long-term sustainability of outer space activities. So cooperation is a hallmark of our approach. We're going to work with our international partners on that, and certainly addressing this is something we'll do through those channels.
And just a quick follow-up, if this rocket does cause some serious damages here on Earth, would the White House enforce China paying some sort of compensation as required by the UN Space Liability Convention?
Well, again, I think we'd of course refer to the advice and guidance from U.S. Space Command and Department of Defense and others, but we're not at this point. We are certainly tracking its location through U.S. Space Command, and hopefully that's not the outcome that we are working through. Okay, go ahead, Eli.
Thanks, Jen. I'm just interested if you have any response to some of the moves made this week by a few Republican governors to get rid of, protections that were in place for people, public benefits, also public health restrictions, basically sending the message that the pandemic is over and sort of criticizing Washington, the CDC, the bureaucrats, as Ron DeSantis put it, for telling people they still need to wear masks indoors, those sorts of things, saying that the vaccines have worked. How are you trying to thread that needle by celebrating the progress of all the people who have been vaccinated and keeping these things in place, and also trying to keep people from viewing this through a political lens? Any outreach to any of these Republican state officials about the message they're sending and any response to them from the podium?
Sure. Well, first, we not only do a regular governor's call every single week with governors from across the country, from red states and blue states, to talk about implementation, any changes we're making to allocations, as we talked about just yesterday. But we also have regular engagement with governors and local officials about where the public health guidance is going, questions they have, and even sometimes challenges they have in their communities. Our position from the federal government continues to be that the public health guidelines are in place to keep people safe, not just governors and leaders of states, of course, but people in communities, families, kids, people who are in vulnerable populations, and that we'll continue to communicate that from the federal level, even as governors are pulling back their implementation in some places where it might be premature.
The president yesterday was talking about transitioning from the mass vaccination centers largely in urban and suburban areas and trying to really be more deliberate, proactive about getting the vaccine to people in outlying areas, rural areas. Is there any concern about having enough vaccinators to reach people in those areas? Will this mostly be run through local pharmacies, or is there going to be a similar effort to authorize different people in sort of medical fields to be able to administer vaccines?
Well, we did take that step some time ago to expand the type of individuals who are qualified to be vaccinators, because early on we recognized that it wasn't just about supply, it was also about locations, and obviously, as you alluded to, we've made some changes and adjustments, but also about vaccinators and ensuring that a larger group of individuals, dentists, veterinarians, others, could also be eligible to do the vaccine and get it into people's arms, because we want to ensure that in a range of communities across the country, there's a range of options for people who can do exactly that. So that's not a concern that we are tracking at this point in time, a lack of, because we did a lot of work preparing for those needs. And I would say that, there were some mass vaccination sites we opened even last week. But what we announced yesterday is a kind of a phased approach based on the phase we're in at this point in time, which is that we are recognizing the daily numbers will go down a bit because we're at such a high percentage rate relative to where people thought we were at this point in the pandemic. And we know it will be harder and harder to reach people and meet people where they are, hence the increase, as you suggested, in walk-in hours or the announcement of walk-in hours on mobile units, on partnerships with primary care physicians and doctors to make it even easier and more accessible for people to get the vaccine.
Just one more on tomorrow on the trip to Louisiana. So far, the president has mostly traveled to states that are, competitive swing states. Louisiana is obviously a red state, but has been impacted by COVID.
Except for Texas and Ohio.
Well, okay. But, there's been a lot of travel to some of these states. Can you just talk a little bit about the takeaway that people should have when they see the president showing up, in deep red Louisiana tomorrow and the issues that he wants to draw attention to?
Sure. Well, first, the president, when he was elected, knew from day one he was going to govern for all Americans, and that was going to be his objective. And so even if it's for people who didn't vote for him, for states who didn't vote for him, his focus is on delivering for them. So tomorrow he'll make 2 stops in Louisiana. His focus will be on talking about the American Jobs Plan and how that plan, in a historic investment in infrastructure, rebuilding the type of bridges, roads in Louisiana that are long overdue to be upgraded, could help not only people's travel and commutes, but also create jobs in these communities. And it's not about just delivering for people who voted for him or people who have blue check marks next to their name because they're Democrats. And that's part of what this message should send, this visit should send. Go ahead, Hans.
I get that you sort of prefer the Moody's model over the Penn-Wharton. I'm just curious if the White House is going to accept whatever CBO and JCT scores the president's proposals at.
Well, I think our issue with the Penn-Wharton model was the data it was based on and that it was off. And so we'll have to look at what the data that any future analysis is based on, and then we'll give an assessment.
Okay, so even official, you're not embracing whatever the official assessment will be from CBO and JCT?
Well, Hans, there is no assessment at this point in time. Our assumption is that they would be abiding by accurate data, so we'll look forward to seeing those assessments.
And when do you expect those assumptions and data to come in?
I don't have a prediction of that.
Thank you.
Suggest you ask them. Go ahead, Alex.
Does President Biden agree with Governor Whitmer's decision on the oil and gas pipeline? She's citing essentially water quality issues. It's really angered Canada. Does President Biden agree with that decision?
I'd have to take a closer look at the pipeline. I mean, we have been evaluating in a case-by-case scenario. Which pipeline are you talking about?
The Enbridge.
The Enbridge one. We look at each pipeline through the prism of the impact on the environment and also the impact on the economy, and we make assessments. So I'd have to talk to our team if that assessment's been concluded or not.
Okay, and the president's going to be talking about implementation later.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of oversight plans are being talked about as far as the spending and making sure it's...
For the restaurant program or just the programs in general?
In general. Inspector generals, can you give us an idea of what sort of oversight is being talked about?
Well, first, the president came into this job having served as the person overseeing the implementation of the American Rescue and Recovery, the ARRA, back in the early days of the Obama-Biden administration. He takes waste, fraud, and abuse incredibly seriously, and we have put in place changes and reforms to programs at SBA and other programs that have been implemented where we've seen incidents of that in the past. It's also why he has somebody, Gene Sperling, overseeing the American Rescue Plan implementation to ensure there is coordination across government, that we are tracking where we see issues, and certainly he's somebody who welcomes oversight and wants to do everything we can to reduce any waste, fraud, and abuse in these programs.
And just finally, I wonder if the president or anyone else in the administration spoke with the Treasury Secretary yesterday, given some of her remarks that she then sought to clarify.
Well, the Secretary herself addressed her remarks later in the afternoon, so I'm not aware of any calls yesterday. She will be here in the briefing room, and they'll have their regular economic briefing on Friday. Go ahead in the back.
So I want to talk about climate for a second. The president had said in his executive order in January that he would call for a green procurement plan for the federal government, and part of that was about buying electric cars. The deadline for that plan was April 27th. Do you know what the status of it is and why the delay?
I don't have an update on the status. It is something, as you noted, he talked about early administration. He's absolutely committed to, but I'm happy to check with our team and see where our report on that lives.
And I also want to ask, does the Biden administration have a timeline at this point for issuing pardons and commutations?
I don't have any previewing of that to provide, and probably won't from here. Go ahead in the back.
Yes, is the Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti under active consideration to be the ambassador to India or any other country?
I don't have any personnel announcements or assessments to make here from the podium, but hopefully we'll have some more formal announcements on ambassadors soon.
And the Tokyo Olympics are 12 weeks out. At what point does the president need to make a decision about his attendance?
His attendance?
And what factors are delaying the announcement?
Well, I think the president and his team assess any invitation as it comes in, but 12 weeks is some period of time. I don't have any updates or predictions on whether or not he'll travel or accept the invitation made to attend the Olympics. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Two questions. First, on the large sports arenas that are beginning to allow for fully vaccinated fans in special sections. Both Citi Field and Yankee Stadium in New York have made those announcements, and I know there are some others. Does the administration think that that is a good approach for sports teams to take, and maybe other large event venues? And are there any concerns about equity when it comes to access to facilities, if particularly those that were built with some public money in some cases, I'm sure, when it comes to people who may not have been able to get vaccinated yet?
Well, first, everyone in the country is eligible to be vaccinated, and certainly at this point in time. So we are, and we, as we've noted here, have taken a range of steps to ensure we are meeting people where they are, getting these vaccine doses out to communities around the country. In terms of an assessment of the safety of this approach by sports teams, I'd have to talk to our COVID team about that. And I think it's unlikely we're going to be weighing into every private sector decision about how they're moving forward once people are vaccinated. But I will check with them on that.
Okay, and then the other question, if I can follow up on the debt limit question just a little bit.
Sure.
Does the president have a position on whether or not the debt limit itself should exist at all, considering every couple of years we go through this question of what are the extraordinary measures and how much extra time do we have, and we know at the end of the day that it's going to have to get raised or else we're going to have some sort of economic calamity. Does the president have a view on the question more broadly of whether or not there even should be a debt limit?
Well, first, raising or suspending the debt ceiling doesn't authorize new spending. It merely allows Treasury to meet obligations that Congress has already approved, right? It has been the case for many years, and there have been bipartisan votes to support. So, the president does believe that Treasury should be able to meet its obligations and believes that Congress should move forward in a bipartisan manner, as they have historically in the past, including 3 times during the prior administration. Go ahead in the back.
Thanks. On the G7 trip, is there any advance on whether the president will meet with the Queen? And separately, has the president or the First Lady been in contact recently with Prince Harry?
I don't have any more trip details. Who among us wouldn't want to go see the Queen? But I don't have any details to preview at this point in time. I expect as we get closer to the trip, we'll have more specifics. And I don't have any calls or engagements with Prince Harry or Meghan Markle to read out for you with the President or the First Lady.
One follow-up, is there a timeline on an announcement for the British ambassador?
A timeline? I don't have a timeline for that.